In today's episode, we will be looking into the stories behind all of the known legends of Night City, people who have earned the respect of others from all over the city by doing acts of bravery, or who have died in a gig that was seen as impossible, going out in a blaze of glory. These individuals have been referenced within 2077, but also in previous versions of Cyberpunk from 2013, 2020, and Cyberpunk Red. With that said though, we will not be looking at the edgerunners from the TV show, as I will be doing a full video on their backstories when the new Edgerunner pack comes out by Talzorian Games later this year. But for now, let's dive into every single one of the Night City legends from the Cyberpunk universe. Night City's whole story comes from one man, this man being Richard Knight. Born in 1954, Knight was raised within Pasadena, California, and was the second of his 5 siblings. Both of his parents were extremely intelligent scientists working as researchers for the company of Cooltech, which specialized in material science. As Knight began to grow, he found an instant love for engineering, and from a young age up until his early adult years, worked hard to make sure he had a career set on this skill. However, as he went into college to study this subject, Knight had a huge bitter falling out with his roommate and co-business owner, Romney Zukarian, and because of it, instantly changed his career path from engineering to business financial investment, allowing him to become well versed in the ins and outs of business and be able to regain his company that he once owned with his roommate. As Knight became more and more successful going into the 1990s, his influence grew around the country as he combined both his engineering skills with his business skills. However, there was a new problem. Knight became increasingly aware that there was to be a horrific financial crash coming soon that would devastate the country and most likely the rest of the world. With rumors of this passing through the news outlets, violence started to take place on the streets, as well as a huge disruption to business as the country went into full panic mode. On top of this, his work on corporate funded projects was becoming incredibly tedious, and Knight was getting frustrated with it all. Knight knew he had to do something to save himself as well as the economy, and because of this, Knight went on to set up his own side company known as Knight International, drawing up plans to create this brand new, never before seen utopia of a city that would be controlled and managed by the corporations and would be free from any form of economic collapse that may hit the rest of the country. It was to be completely planned, self-sufficient, and capable of holding off even the most determined criminals from taking over it. On top of that, its whole plan was to make sure it was extremely diverse, showcasing areas from all different cultures and nationalities, and on top of all of that, would have a capital that was said to be a beacon of enlightened capitalism. It was a plan no one had ever seen before, but it was immediately praised for its overall ambition. Straight away, corporations got involved looking to set up their urban areas, making sure that the governments involved were to be corporation linked, to make sure that no anti-business elements came to fruition and that they could constantly thrive within this city. And by 1992, Arasaka, EBM, and Petrochem had signed onto Knight's plan of a corporate utopia. Scouting all over America, Knight finally found the place he was going to make his city in. That was to be within Morro Bay. Morro Bay had just been hit recently by an incident being only described as a post-Holocaust horror, most likely brought on by the financial collapse. Now it just lay as a barren ghost town, and Knight knew it was perfect for him to convert. With this, Knight and Petrochem bought the land and started building there, with Petrochem taking over the nearby power plant within the town and looking to set up an offshore port and oil terminal site. With this all set up, Knight and other members of his group of corpos hired the Arasaka Corporation to remove the nearby street gangs to make sure the area was safe to continue the construction. But now other corporations had got involved in this process as land was being turned over to make way for this new city. The same happened to the sea as land was dumped into it to make sure the hills and mountains were now flattened and widened by 10 miles. By 1994, the construction was in full swing, but again, there was a new problem. The corporations that were the main financial backers were not construction companies, meaning they could not pour resources into it. Because of this, they had to seek outsider help. This came within the form of the mob. The mafia and the Yakuza, as well as others, started getting involved and having a stranglehold on the heavy construction jobs. With this, they then went on to control all of the unions as well as the governmental agencies in charge of construction licenses, environmental environmental impacts and other building necessities. Because of how smart the mob were in this, not only did they now control the construction side to the city, they also made sure they had investment in the city itself, pouring tons of money into the partnership, allowing them to have gambling, prostitution and drug franchises within the city when it opened. But although they had all of this planned, Knight had other ideas. His utopia of a city needed to be built with specific materials in some areas. Those materials could not be acquired by the construction companies owned by the mob. And on top of this, Knight also made sure that this city was to be crime-free and shut down their ideas of how the mob wanted to rule it. With these things in place and Knight bringing in his old associates known as Halsey, Ferris and Skiv, the mob were furious and sought to bring down Knight to take over the full project of his city. After 4 years of construction, Knight's life became hard. Every day he would get death threats and assassination attempts, and eventually threats of sabotage and intimidation started to take place, and because of it, he had to bring in his corporate partners to deal with this fast. Whilst for a bit the corporations were dealing with it, Knight eventually paid the price for going against the mob. And on the 20th of September 1998, Knight was shot and killed in his penthouse suite at the top of the newly constructed Parkview Tower. With this assassination taking place, the project that was known as Coronado City was renamed to honor the man who started it all. The project was now to be known as Knight City, and with his death, his wife Miriam restructured his company and founded the Knights Foundation to make sure that his vision of his perfect city was to be honored and encouraged. It's quite clear why Richard Knight is a Knight City legend. Without him, none of this would be possible, and his vision for a new world was unparalleled. Without him, many of the others we will be exploring now would have arguably not been made legends, and quite clearly Knight was doing something to shake the status quo, otherwise he wouldn't have been killed where he stood. Santiago was born within an army hospital near Berlin, Germany. Like his later years, he and his family would always move about, living on the road, and for Santiago, this is all he knew as a kid growing up. His mother was a mixed heritage lady from Native America as well as Hispanic descent, whereas his father was a second-generation Filipino-American. With both sets of parents being from diverse backgrounds, Santiago grew up with an extremely large family with many cousins and other relatives who, like his family, also travelled around a lot. A lot of his travelling might have been a result of his father serving overseas, albeit pretty brief, as he would be a consul for the US Department of State, and actually served with them when Santiago was born, hence why he was born within an army hospital. But with him now born, it became quite clear, especially at this point in time, that being a consul for the US military was extremely dangerous, and because of it, Santiago's family returned back to their home of the United States. Unfortunately for the family, their return couldn't have been at a worse time, as when they got back, the lawyers' purge of 1996 had officially kicked off, and Santiago's father was a prime target for the angry mobs. This forced the family into hiding as they would go underground and essentially turn them into an early nomad community. This changed Santiago massively as his upbringing became quite a mess. By the age of 16 years old, he didn't even recognize half of the people he was living with, not even recognizing his family around him. That said, even though things had changed massively around him, because of that early nomadic life traveling all the time, Santiago never seemed that fazed by it. Before the age of 18, however, Santiago was extremely small for his age. This didn't help him in life as he would be rejected by a lot of others and made to feel quite left out by parts of his own community. This started a new urge for Santiago to go off and try new things, leaving his family behind. And just before his 19th birthday, that is exactly what he did, as he went on to leave his half-formed clan and went looking for jobs. Most of these jobs being ones that weren't massively respected by nomad culture. In the end, Santiago became a hired soldier, a bodyguard, and even a roadie for several different employers. Not the most glamorous life, but a chance for him to stand out as his own individual. Now living life on the road again, Santiago went on to meet with a solo named Rogue Amenderes, someone we will explore later in this video, and immediately the two hit it off as they became business partners doing regular gigs all over and around Night City. It became clear who he was at this time. Santiago was a womanizer who loved guns and fast superbikes. He lived within within Night City at this time as a hired gun, but whilst he loved the luxury items it gave to him and the many eddies that he got from gigs, Santiago knew being an edgerunner was an extremely tough life that led to moments of darkness where Santiago didn't even want to live sometimes, but he always bounced back and continued working. 2013 provided Santiago with his biggest test yet, as he would yet again meet with Rogue at the Atlantis Club to discuss business. As Johnny Silverhand, Rogue's former lover, barged in, he would pitch a new gig for the two, one that Rogue immediately rejected, but Santiago would want to take as Johnny was offering to pay more than any gig he had done before, and stating to Rogue that business comes first over past relations. This job was to rescue Johnny's on and off girlfriend Alt Cunningham from the clutches of the Arasaka Corporation. This made Santiago even more interested in the gig and agreed instantly to it. As the gig went ahead, it was a somewhat success if they did get to reach Alt, but sadly couldn't save her from her inevitable fate. After that, the crew had to make their getaway and escape the wrath of Arasaka by going into hiding. Santiago and Johnny would then go on to both stay with the Aldecaldo's clan, who were based out within Mexico at this point in time. Here Santiago started to earn great respect with the clan, where his fellow nomads started to see what his long-term plans for them were through his actions and his words, and with that motivated many of them to follow him and fight for what they believed in. The whole clan started to mold themselves into something new thanks to Santiago's time here, and finally he would go on to meet their leader of the time, known as Juan Aldecaldo, shortly before he died. With this meeting, Juan told Santiago to keep doing what he was doing and help the Aldecaldos so that they could help others. After that meeting, Juan would go on to die, and Santiago was promoted to the Aldecaldo's leader, something that Santiago felt was too much work at first, but took it respecting Juan's wishes. Now the new leader of the Aldecaldo clan, Santiago led them back to the United States to seek out work and help them grow as a clan. With their move to the US, Santiago decided it was honorable to take up the second name of Aldecaldo in memory of the clan's former leader, and also due to the fact that he had finally found himself amongst people that he could finally call family, and this was his true home with the Aldecaldos. By 2017, the nomad clans all over the US created the Seven Nations, which consisted of some of the largest families out there. During the meeting in Omaha, Santiago called for others to join him and the Aldecaldos, in which many of the nomads who weren't part of a nation joined, and with that turned his clan into one of the most numerous and powerful nomad nations out there. By the 2020s all the way up to the 2040s, the Fourth Corporate War was happening all over the place, and the Aldecaldos were caught up in the fights. Santiago tried to rally his clan together during this time to make sure they became immune from the effects of the conflict. Knowing he had to do something drastic to end this gigantic war, Santiago heard of a mission to take out Arasaka, which involved the people he once worked with, Johnny and Rogue, and sent the Aldecaldo Lobos to aid them in their assault on the Night City Tower. With the attack being a success, the Fourth Corporate War came to an end, and either during or after this, Santiago fathered a son that would be known as Trace, who became known all across the Night City media. Santiago was a good father, as he would look after Trace, tell him stories about the old days, and helped him grow into a leader. This was witnessed by all of the clan around him, which earned Santiago the nickname Old Man, as he continued to lead the clan going into the late 2040s. But by 2077, Santiago had died, but his legacy remained strong throughout all of the clan, as well as the many people within Night City. Loads admired what he had done for the Aldecaldos and how he helped them prosper during extremely trying times. For their new leader Saul Bright, however, Santiago was seen as a legend, but wasn't as idolized, as Saul believed that Santiago split his life between Night City and his family too much, and because of that, it made him less of a nomad. That said, he is considered a legend of Night City due to his years working as an edgerunner with Rogue, his attacks on the Arasaka headquarters, and how he turned the nomad clan of the Aldecaldos from a small family into the largest nomad nation in the country. Rogue was always a rebellious individual ever since she was a teenager, but also knew that the hierarchy of gang life was not for her, and instead of joining one, went her own way, becoming what was known as a solo. Following this life goal, she would succeed pretty quickly, becoming a renowned merc within Night City, and like mentioned earlier, teamed up with other mercs such as Santiago to help their businesses. During her time within Night City, Rogue would go on to form a relationship with the hit rocker boy of the time known as Johnny Silverhand, where she would often request to go and visit a drive-in theatre for a date, but Silverhand would often ignore this request that she made. But by 2011, her relationship with him would take a nosedive, as he would go on to cheat with her, which Rogue found out and became extremely bitter about with him. Despite the hostility between the two, like mentioned in Santiago's section, Rogue would team up with Johnny reluctantly to attack the Arasaka Tower and recover Alt, who was being experimented on for their new super weapon. After the mission was complete, however, Rogue did not follow Johnny or Santiago into hiding and seemed to just go back into Night City and continued her work as a solo, distancing herself away from Johnny once again. That was until the Fourth Corporate War, where once again she would have to team up with him to raid the Arasaka Tower and try and sabotage Arasaka's plans. Ultimately, the plan went well and they were able to take out the Arasaka's Night City headquarters. However, in the process, Rogue had to say a final goodbye to her once lover and the man that she despised but at the same time was always drawn to, as Johnny would go on to be brutally killed by another Night City legend known as Adam Smasher. After leaving the tower, their mission was complete and once again Rogue went back to being a solo in her city. At some point around the year of 2045, Rogue would be involved in a major car crash that badly injured her, so much so that even cyberware could not fix all of the internal damage. With the news of the damages being told to Rogue, she had no choice but to retire from the solo lifestyle, and thanks to all of the contacts she had made during her time in Night City, became a fixer, helping other solos get regular gigs with her wide selection of contacts. Here she would base herself in the club known as the Afterlife within Little China, as it would become a hotspot for Night City solos. By 2077, Rogue's reputation was at an all-time high, as she was seen as the Queen of the Afterlife and easily the top fixer within all of Night City. Afterlife was her fortress now, and anyone who entered that club would witness how great she really was, having to be personally invited just to go and see her. Nyx would be the Afterlife's top net runner, Crispin Weyland her top solo and bodyguard during big gigs, Emmerich Bronson would be the bouncer of the club, and Claire Russell being the bartender who kept regular checks on everyone who entered. It would be here where Rogue would meet up with the up-and-coming merc of V, who would open her eyes to her past that she believed she had left behind years ago. But it also gave her an opportunity to make amends for things she could have never resolved, such as going to the drive-in with Johnny Silverhand and getting revenge on Adam Smasher, the Borg that killed her once lover. In the end, her fate would be in the hands of V and their decisions, but even if she were to leave this world, her legacy would forever live on, as she has not only been an incredible solo herself, but has also been one of the hardest working fixers Night City has ever seen, and even if Afterlife goes under new management, Rogue Armendariz will always be the Queen of the Afterlife. While Saburo might not be a regular resident in Night City, he is absolutely a legend throughout the land and the whole world. To start with, he survived the Second World War being heavily injured with his whole left arm and vision in one side of his face. Almost took his own life, but turned it into an opportunity to create a new life goal, turning Arasaka into the world leader in weapons manufacturing and be the pride and joy of Japan. He'd then go on to spend all of his years after his father's death growing the corporation to all new heights, fulfilling the goal he set out to achieve as Arasaka became a household name, especially out in the East. He also was heavily involved in dodgy dealings, moving money about to save his family from utter collapse, with the world facing heavy financial problems. He did undercover attacks on other corporations, stole their data through selling them tracking information, and also provided VIPs, corporations, and even countries private armies of Arasaka troops. Thanks to everything he put into making Arasaka a superpower of its own, Saburo made it into the Forbes 500 wealthiest and influential people list twice, reaching number 2 at his all-time high. Saburo became so power hungry that he made all his children work for the corporation, putting them through training routines and even sending them to company-bought islands to go through rigorous training to make sure they were ready for when they were to take over the corporation. With that said though, Saburo always seemed to defy death, as he would massively enhance himself to further his lifespan and fix all of the health issues he faced, like his arm and his eye. By the time he was well over 100 years old, he'd have this whole corporation go to war against his American rivals of Militech in what was said to be the largest war humanity had ever seen. And whilst the end result was Arasaka's defeat and exile from the US, that did not stop Saburo in his quest, as he would continue to grow it and bring it back to its former glory. One of the biggest reasons he's a Night City legend was thanks to his involvement within the Unification War, started by Rosalind Myers, who just wanted to unify all of the states of America together again and bring them back to their former glory. Here Arasaka would side with the free states, providing them with military forces, and pumped tons of funds into Night City, forcing Militech to retreat and end the war, fearing that any further involvement would lead to a new corporate war. Without Saburo sending his forces into Night City, the whole of the country would be under the fierce leadership of the NUSA, and Night City would have lost all of its independence and what made it unique. Due to this action, Arasaka was welcomed back into Night City as their hero once again, despite the controversies they had been involved in over the many years before. They were the saviors of their city and now provided many of the residents with jobs for the corporation. But Saburo's latest and greatest invention came in the form of a device known as the Relic, which was brand new technology that enabled the rich to store their soul essentially on a device so they could continue on after they died. This was seen as massively controversial due to it being a way for the rich to keep on living, but it summarized Saburo completely. Now being over 180 years old at this point in time, the way he went about getting the technology was also stuff of legend, stealing the original creator from a rival company and sacrificing her to make it work, and even testing it on people from rival corporations such as Militech and anyone who defied him and his empire. Whilst the Relic and the Soul Killer project that was linked to it would also be the downfall of Saburo, leading to his own son Yorinobu betraying him and tearing him down from the inside, with Yorinobu ultimately murdering him in cold blood, Saburo even then would defy death by storing his personality and image on a secret relic project named Relic 2.0 and getting his daughter of Hanako to find a suitable host to put him in so he could continue running his corporation into the later half of the 21st century. Granted, he would need the help of the local Merc of V to make this a reality, but the sheer idea in itself is just stuff of legend, especially with the fact that if this plan were to go ahead, he would use his own son's body to continue to live on. I mean, at that stage, the man is a total insane dictator. That is why he is seen as a legend of not just Night City, but the whole world. What he has done for his corporation is incredible. They are known all over and are truly like their own little country, owning private militaries, top-of-the-line military equipment that they sell all over, have fought off many different recessions and attacks to continue on living, and the same can be said for Saburo himself. Whilst technically he is dead now unless V helps the corporation out, his legacy and what he set up will forever be remembered in the history books. And for Night City, as much as it might pain them to say, without him and his corporation, they would be flying a completely different flag in their center, and their whole identity would be lost to the NUSA. Whilst this was just a glimpse of Saburo Arasaka's life, hopefully it gives you an insight into why he's not just a legend within the business world, but why he is also a Night City legend as well. Morgan Blackhand was born within Brooklyn, New York, and quite early on it was evident that Morgan was born to be a true soldier and a fierce leader. Getting to adulthood within the 1980s, Morgan served within the US military and became known as one of the fiercest soldiers of the platoon. During his rookie years, Morgan was faced with an immediate situation where he would have to take over the command of his special cyber soldier unit due to his commander going cyber psycho during their mission. Because of moments like this, it became quite clear to many that Morgan was special special. He was a natural-born leader who could adapt to situations extremely quickly. But as his war came to an end, Morgan would be discharged from the army and simply became known as a combat veteran who had served his country well. Leaving the army, however, Morgan's purpose in life became lost as he did not know what was left for him anymore. His skills in killing and leading the squadron was lost in the regular world, and on top of that, his skills in demolition made it so that many employers out there did not see him as a worthy candidate for their business, and because of it, Morgan was turned down many times for just generic desk jobs. This continued for months on end, with Morgan struggling to really survive. His skills were being wasted, but there was nothing out there for him in the normal mundane world. However, one day as Morgan roamed the streets of his home city, he would go on to bump into a local booster gang, another term for a street gang who were known for enhancing themselves with cybernetics, and when bumping into them came face to face with their leader, who immediately took a disliking to him. With tension getting hostile between the two, with the booster gang leader hating Morgan more and more by the minute, Morgan would eventually take the leader out, and with ease, making easy pickings of all of the gang members and really showing to anyone witnessing this that Morgan Blackhand still had his incredible skills and was not to be messed with. This did indeed go on to impress one faction in the process, this being the military corporation known as Militech, whose recruiter happened to be within the area during the attack and saw everything that had happened. Shortly after Morgan had wiped out the gang, the recruiter walked up to Morgan and made him an offer he really could not refuse, bringing him into the Militech world and enabling Morgan to become a mercenary who would be able to take care of any problems the corporation might face. Becoming Militech's mercenary was fantastic for him, as he was able to finally use and develop the skills he had learned within the army back in the 1980s. But not only did this help him develop as an individual, it would also allow him to teach many other professionals the tricks of the trade, enlightening them about his experiences on the battlefield, which would go on to massively increase his street cred. He would also during this time go on to resolve many high-profile incidents, with one incident of note involving the legendary rock star Kerry Eurodyne, who had been kidnapped within the year of 2019. This whole incident would be seen as a fundamental moment for the band of samurai, as it allowed them to not only meet Morgan Blackhand himself, but to learn from him. Morgan during this kidnapping mission would single-handedly capture all 5 of Kerry's kidnappers and turn them all into the federal authorities, once again allowing him to develop even more street cred and become loved by all the samurai and Kerry's fans. For many though, their amazement came from the fact that Morgan not only got the job done, but he did it without killing any of them. Many people could have done this job with ease, but to do it without one death was something incredible, especially when he was completely outnumbered 5-1. Morgan was seen as outstanding in this regard because it not only helped Kerry out, but it also completely embarrassed the kidnappers' sponsors in the process, and would go on to define Morgan as a true pragmatist. He wasn't just a heartless killer, he thought about everything and used it in his work, with most remembering him as that legendary solo who would be able to capture targets alive instead of just going in guns blazing. By the year of 2020, Morgan Blackhand was seen as the #1 solo professional in the business by the Solo of Fortune annual 2020 awards within the United States. His fame was known all around, and many groups would fear him and his work, allowing him to only take the best jobs that paid the most. Morgan would also add to his fame and expertise by writing the Enforcer's Handbook, which would be so popular that it would go on to sell over 1 million copies by that same year. With this book now in circulation and many professionals using it for their work, Morgan was able to completely revolutionize the entire solo profession and turn it into something known all over the US. But the world was quickly changing, and with the solo profession getting bigger by the minute, it was only a matter of time before more battles were to be had all over. Going into 2021, it was time for Morgan Blackhand to show off his skills once again and to make his impression on the world. As the 4th Corporate War started, Militech devised a couple of strike teams to hit the Arasaka headquarters in Night City. Morgan would go on to lead one of these strike teams, named Strike Team Omega. Ultimately, Strike Team Omega was the backup squadron which worked alongside Militech's elite cyborg units to take over the task if Johnny's Alpha Squadron and Beta Squadron failed in their task. But as the task went ahead, it became quite clear that as the data was so hard to get to, the only option was to go nuclear and send the data back into the old net for Arasaka to have to rummage through for many years. The plan was going well for the squadrons as they had successfully infiltrated the tower and set up all of the nuclear devices. However, one thing Morgan had not taken into account was Arasaka's prized merc, who was on the verge of becoming a full Borg. That was the sadistic killing machine known as Adam Smasher. For years, Smasher had hated Morgan Blackhand, most likely because of his reputation, but mainly for the fact that Smasher Smasher believed that cybernetics trumped natural human abilities, with Smasher stating regularly metal was better than meat. For years, Smasher had tried to get the upper hand on Morgan, frequently trying to challenge him, but Morgan would always refuse. But now with Morgan working for Militech and Smasher working for their warring enemies of Arasaka, Smasher was finally able to face him one-on-one and prove that metal was indeed better than meat. With Morgan trying to escape the Arasaka tower that was minutes away from detonating, Smasher, wearing his Dai Onai battle suit, would start his attack on Morgan, and the two legendary solos would test their fierceness. But with the charges now detonating, the building was becoming extremely unstable. But that did not stop the two as they continued to battle on, launching themselves at each other in a last desperate attempt to kill each other. But as they did, the nukes would detonate and the story of their battle came to an end. No one knows what the outcome was, but it was said that both were able to survive, with Smasher becoming even more disfigured and even more Borg than before, something that we will explore later in the video. The tower was completely destroyed, however, completely enraging Arasaka and forcing them to retreat. But for the strike force, they had lost two vital members in this attack. The first being Johnny Silverhand, who had been captured by Arasaka themselves and turned into an engram for their project known as the Soul Killer. The other member was Morgan Blackhand himself, whose whereabouts was completely unknown. Years passed with no one hearing from the legendary Solo. None of his work was appearing on the streets, and not one gang had reported coming into contact with the deadly individual. However, eventually rumors started to spread regarding his whereabouts, with some stating he had returned to President Kress to report the failure of the mission and to continue his work once again, but this time as a secret governmental asset. Between the years of 2035 and 2045, rumors continued on about where Morgan had gone, with many people saying they spotted him in several first wave cities, places that needed little reconstruction and resources to rebuild after the Fourth Corporate War. But by 2077, there is still no sign of Morgan Blackhand, with many of his crew, including the dead Johnny Silverhand, not really mentioning him at all. However, two people still know of what he did, those being Jackie Wells, who loves a good legend story, and Claire Russell, the bartender of Afterlife, home of the legends of Night City. But despite their mentions of Morgan, even those two still have no idea where he is to this date. One news report does go on to mention a mysterious shootout in Japantown where several Lazarus agents were found dead, with one sole survivor being described as a portly man with a black cyber arm, meaning that maybe this was the handiwork of Morgan Blackhand. However, this Solo back in the day was renowned for doing the task at hand without really killing anyone. So could this really be his work, or someone who was inspired by his legacy and his handbook written back in 2020? With the black cyber arm, it could have also been Kurt Hansen, we just don't know. But regardless of all the questions, Morgan is one of the most powerful mercs ever seen, who single-handedly boosted the solo profession and influenced so many inspiring professionals. You could even argue that without Morgan and his influence, V would never have gotten to where they are today, and because of the impact he has made on the world, he has become one of the biggest Night City legends. Kerry Eurodyne was born on the 7th of April 1988, but sadly not much is known about his upbringing. Kerry first rose onto the scene and reached his fame when he joined the band Samurai as their lead and rhythm guitarist as well as vocalist. Joining the band, Kerry had one goal, and that was to change the world through music, something he shared closely with his best friend and fellow band member Johnny Silverhand. However, that said, both of them had different ways of expressing this goal, and often this led to hostile moments and frequent falling outs. Every time Kerry and Johnny would have these fights, Kerry would threaten to leave the band as he would go on to try and set up his own solo act, which at the time would have been huge. However, Kerry shared a close bond with Johnny, and because of it, he was always being pulled back into Samurai. Eventually, Samurai did disband, but that was thanks to Johnny Silverhand leaving, which devastated Kerry and sent him into a spiral for a couple of years. Not knowing what to do with his life now, Kerry went back to his roots, staying on an island in the New Philippines for 2 years straight, where he would rethink everything in his life, dealing with mental demons and relaxing before going back out there on stage. With that recuperation now out of the way, Kerry did go back into the music industry as a new man, ready to take on everything in a new light. His new goal was a simple one. It was to simply elevate his own name out of the shadow that Silverhand had left behind. Starting completely fresh was not ideal for Kerry, however he was determined, and because of it, it paid off as his hard work and effort saw him massive success, with his music sounding bigger and better than anything on the scene at this point in time. His albums would sell so well over the years that they would eventually go on to be platinum records, and his own broken guitar collection would go on to be auctioned for thousands of Eurodollars, and ultimately his voice was renowned all over the world. By 2077, Kerry, who was now 87 years old, believe it or not, was clearly modified to look younger and perform at a higher level, as he was signed to his record label of MSM Media Corp with a new album coming soon, something that his fans had been long awaiting. That said, Kerry was dealing with those demons again, having a constant feeling of being alone, lacking any form of creativity, and just in a really dark place, wanting to end it all, believing there was no point. Luckily for Kerry, however, he would be living in Night City, and his once best friend back in the days of Samurai was living inside the head of the local Merc of V, and with their help would bring Kerry back to a creative state, help him combat those fears of rejection and get back onto the scene once again. Although he might be a legend of Night City in the world at this point in time, especially in the music scene, Kerry's biggest threat is the new generations coming up through the ranks. More notably, the new laser pop sensation girl group of Us Cracks, consisting of 3 artists, Blue Moon, Red Menace and Purple Force, who were also owned by his same record label. But thanks to V again, Kerry could overcome this new obstacle and help his name get out there even further and evolve into the new age. But regardless, his music over the years, be that with Samurai or his solo work, has solidified him as a music legend, and certainly a Night City legend as well. Susan Forrest was born around the 1990s, and whilst not much is known about her backstory, she became one of the most highly trained individuals within the NCPD, specifically within the Max TAC division. However, whilst serving there, Susan requested to transfer to a new job of state executioner for the NorCal Free State after being heavily wounded in a firefight. Being one of the deadliest people within Night City and NorCal in a position of authority, Susan states that she does not have any time for punks and takes great pride in what she does, especially when she gets to track down an escapee and take them out. With how crucial her role is, Susan is paid extremely handsomely, driving around the whole of Night City in the Benson Cascade hovercar and AV9, depending on what job she is on at the time. On top of that, she also wears some of the best battle gear out there, that being from Gibson Battle Gear, as well as a Salamander fireproof jacket, meaning she is extremely hard to take out. That said, Susan is extremely level-headed and rational, but if you were to make a wrong move and upset her, it will be the last mistake you make, and she will be the last face you will ever see within Night City. In the end, you don't become the state executioner by being a nice person. To this day, albeit she hasn't been seen since 2020, Susan is one of the toughest solos there are, and on top of that, she absolutely loves everything she does. Her job is simple. She hunts and kills fugitives with a zeal that can only be described as religious. In the words of one individual who was chased down by her, her effectiveness is matched only by her looks, and over 1 year in the role, she has over 20 confirmed executions and has become so renowned all over the city that it seems by the year of 2020, she has been promoted to the new commander of the US Marshal Service Specials Crimes Unit. At least that is what is stated within the Solo magazine anyway. Whilst not around in the year of 2077, it's hard to argue that Susan Forrest is a force to be reckoned with, and quite clearly deserving of the status of Legend of Night City. During the 1990s, the world would go through a massive technological shift as the net was officially set up. This whole piece of groundbreaking technology was not a text-based system that our real-life internet was based around. Instead, it went straight into an international sharing platform similar to our internet of the 2013s. Graphically, the net was so advanced for its time, every site was composed into one engine, and everything you wanted to get to was easily accessible, without you having to type out a URL or find it through a search engine. The net would go on to allow appliances and even cybernetic limbs to become far more common within the world, allowing them to connect to the net, get frequent updates, and function to the highest standard for all customers. Most people who access the net are simply using it through a modem, a computer, or a smart device, and they can see all that is on offer from advertisements to news to entertainment and so on. However, the 3D virtual world can only be accessed by skilled individuals known as Netrunners with with the state-of-the-art equipment such as cyber modems to literally plunge into the virtual worlds. When Netrunners first came about, they would essentially go into one or two enormous walled gardens that were classified as net zones such as Atlantis or Pacifica, where they could go on to interface with the area, grabbing data packs where they could, similar in style to downloading patches of big MMO games. Essentially, whilst the net is a confusing concept, it is pretty much a large digital world where skilled individuals could dive into, explore the landscape around them in a controlled environment, allowing them to see everything a company or corporation has to offer. In the year of 1992, Raish Bartmoss would be born and would more than likely be surrounded by technology with either his parents being interested or just the community he lived with. This is evident because by the age of just 4, Bartmoss started net running, trying to see the digital world around him. Due to a lot of inexperience, still being very young when he explored it more and more, Bartmoss would stupidly use his own name when exploring all of it, not knowing the true risks of exploring the net fully exposed. And eventually he would go on to realize his mistake of exploring the net with his real name and would go on to change it. And thanks to his ever-growing experience with the net, he would be able to wipe away his history and make sure nothing could harm him going into the future. At this same time, Alt Cunningham was also running the net. However, with that said, Alt was doing something no one else had really been doing during this time. Not only would she run it unexposed, but she would also be able to create new concepts and new code whilst inside and out of it. She not only became renowned for being one of the rare few individuals who could net run, but she also became one of the most skilled programmers in the world. As the 2000s came about and the world survived the panic of the Y2K disaster, the net became stronger, and so too did the Netrunners. Another one arose during this time named Spider Murphy, who began net running at the age of 9 in 2004. Her first cyberdeck would be the Hitachi Radio Shack 95, which she would utilize to hack into the corporation of Zetatech's sales office and falsify an order to have Zetatech send her a brand new Paraline 5750A cyberdeck. While Spider Murphy was doing all of that, Bartmoss would find himself working for many different companies, writing software for them. But this would not really last very long, as Bartmoss would always go about double-crossing those companies with another one, running away just before they found out to avoid being caught. Whilst on the run, he would then go on to self-wipe his record to make sure it looked completely clean, and then would join another company to start the process all over again. It was in 2004 where he would settle down within a company called CCI Development, in which he would feel more comfortable believing the company had no real wrongdoings. When working here, Bartmoss would go on to create the program known as the Daemon program, which housed the ability to incorporate several other programs as subroutines, essentially allowing the user to run up to 4 or 5 programs at once. This sole program catapulted the company to great new heights. But once again, soon after the creation of this revolutionary program, Bartmoss would go on to get fired as he went on to drop a political movie into the database code. In response to this firing, Bartmoss went on to fry their whole computer system and would lead the company to go completely bankrupt. With the license of the Daemon program in his hands now, Bartmoss would go on to sell the source code to several software houses and make so much money that he would never have to work ever again. The world was now his oyster, and he could do whatever he wanted and get up to as much mischief as possible. And at this point in time, he was just 17 years of age. With Bartmoss now fully independent, free to do what he wanted, he would go on to meet with Spider Murphy, who would go seek him out to warn him about her corporate father, who was looking for him to try and wipe out his sin from the system. Being in her debt, Bartmoss would go on to help train Spider Murphy in how to become a better netrunner and programmer, and whilst the two started this training process, they would become extremely close and develop a great friendship. After a few years of training, Bartmoss, along with Spider Murphy and 2 other individuals known as Dog and Edgar, will go on to run the net just for fun. As they went around running the net, they were going to mess around with the net's police system known as Netwatch, conducting regular hacks, not for money or for data, but just because they could, and it was fun to mess around with their systems. To them though, they felt like it was the right thing to do, as Netwatch was a corrupt organization, and it proved to everyone else that it was possible to do things that were thought to be impossible. As this group continued exploring the net from the inside, messing around with everything they could, the Pacifica region of the net would go on to be formed, and as it did, Bartmoss would go straight into it and start running within it. Here he would go on to also meet the incredible netrunner known as Alt Cunningham, who together would form a great bond within this part of the net, with Alt describing it as some of her best net running memories she ever had. For Alt, around this time, she had used her money that she had gained from creating programs for corporations corporations to enhance her body, making herself look insanely beautiful to the world and hiring the best European sculpting specialists money could buy. On top of that, she would also go on to buy upgraded neural processors and interface plugs that could help her navigate the net with ease, as well as a golden cyber arm with a hidden compartment in it that was specifically designed to hold a Federate Arms X-22 pistol in case she ever needed it. After running the new Pacifica part of the net with Bartmoss, enjoying her best years as a netrunner, her software programming skills were being spoken about all over the world, and eventually she would be sought out by a mysterious ITS corporation who wanted to use her skills to develop more programs for their corporation. As she began working for this employer, Alt started developing revolutionary pieces of technology that would be based around human AI transfers. The idea behind this program was to store human intellect and personalities into an AI program so that that person could live on even after they died. By this point in Night City's timeline, Spider Murphy, Alt Cunningham, and Raish Bartmoss were all considered the best netrunners out there. They easily stood out compared to other top-level corporate or freelance netrunners. The only real difference between Spider and Bartmoss was she would use more utilitarian and non-lethal software to hack into systems, whereas Bartmoss liked to use more flamboyant and deadly programs to use as much destruction as possible. During the early years of the net up until 2012, these netrunners would be going all around the Night City net, causing trouble for corporations, making a name for themselves and earning a decent profit to fund their very different lifestyles. However, going into 2013, this group of netrunners would go from being 3 iconic names to just 2, as the force of Arasaka would seek to utilize the skills of Alt and put her on a project that would have deadly consequences going into the future. Before the events that would shock the netrunner world in 2013, Alt would go on to meet her new lover, a famous rocker boy known all across the world, known as Johnny Silverhand. Silverhand was known for being an extremely outspoken individual, which we will explore later. Now in a relationship with this rocker boy, she would be exposed to the anarchistic lifestyle and the danger that comes with it. As 2013 came around, Alt's work for the ITS corporation was getting further along as she got a breakthrough in the human transfer and containment of intelligence program. This program was finally up to scratch and was able to transfer the user's mind into the net and explore independent of their existing body. ITS was thrilled by this creation of Alt and capitalized on it, planning to develop it further into a weapon known as the Soul Killer. The idea was instead of transferring personalities, it would capture them and imprison them. Alt would of course be a part of this process, however it is unknown if she liked what her program had been turned into or not. This all came to a head on the 15th of April 2013 when Alt attended Johnny Silverhand's concert. Her skills in programming were so well known all over the world, and word had started spreading about the Soul Killer program that was in development. As the two settled their differences leaving the gig venue, a group of higher mercs would surround the two, pretending to be loyal Silverhand fans. Grabbing Alt, these mercs would in fact be working for Toshiro Harade, a CEO of the corporation of Arasaka, who wanted to acquire the Soul Killer program in which Alt was working on and utilize it for their own goals. Loading Alt into the van, they would injure Silverhand by stabbing him with 2 mantis blades to make sure he could not follow them and get Alt back from their clutches. However, this did not stop Silverhand, as he would set out on one mission, and that was to rescue Alt and fight back against Arasaka, who he now hated with a passion. As Alt was held captive within Arasaka's HQ, she would go on to rebuild the software from her memory and watch closely with fear as Arasaka would test it on her. As the tests went on and on, Alt decided it was wise to develop a failsafe to ensure if things got worse, she could make her escape. Whilst Alt came up with her escape plan, Johnny and a group of fellow hired mercs, including his ex-rogue, started a riot outside the Arasaka Tower in Night City, utilizing his fans, and whilst that diversion was taking place, the rest of the team, eventually joined by Silverhand, would raid the tower looking out for Alt. Knowing full well that Silverhand was on his way to rescue her, Harade used the Soul Killer software on her, but before he was successful, Alt was about to fend off the attack, killing the Arasaka netrunning team in the process, and at the same time Johnny would incapacitate Harade's bodyguard, Akira, getting close to them. As the raid party got closer to Alt, Harade made sure that Silverhand could never get his hands on her ever again, as he would lock her into the net. As Silverhand got into the area in which he was keeping her, he immediately killed Harade, not giving him a chance to explain himself, and quickly disconnected Alt from the system. However, as he did so, he would go on to kill Alt in the process, leaving her as just a lifeless corpse. The only trace of her left, however, was left within the net itself, in which she would be trapped forever. forever. During this dark time for the Netrunner community, Bartmus would go on to move into a conapt building on the edge of the lawless combat zone in the South Night City area. Moving in here, he would demand that anyone who did not have a neural implant to leave the building, and instead demanded to have corporate workers with these processors installed to move in. The reason why he wanted this was so that he could install within them a hidden subconscious personality program to control them every time he wanted. With these drones essentially working for Bartmus every time he wanted them to, he would use them for surveillance and protection to make sure no one could come for him, and if they did, he would be able to fend them off without having to fight himself. This project would take a few years to fully come to fruition, however, and would eventually be working within 2019. Earlier in 2014, however, a new transformation algorithm known as the Harare Grub was released, which was to help reform the net to make it look and feel more modern. Bartmus knew that the net would be fully reformed with this algorithm and likely shut down, but regardless of the fact, he would stay within the net whilst it was being unplugged to watch it be fully redesigned. But whilst in the net, Bartmus would experience a near fatal experience as his heart would stop for a full 10 seconds. Luckily for him, he would recover and go back to normal, but this was certainly something that was going to be a life-changing experience going forward. That following year, Bartmus went on to meet with another netrunner named Kimitara, who he would meet out within the net and would take her out on a date. The date went better than expected as the two went on to sleep together, which weirdly Bartmus went on to regret. But this was most likely due to the fact that after this event, Kimi moved on to yet another person within the media industry, leaving behind Bartmus. This made him despise all physical relationships from this moment forth and pledged to never get into one ever again. As the 2020s came around, Bartmus had finally set up his full drone system, having all of the corporate individuals living in his building doing his bidding whenever he wanted them to. However, before he could continue on his net running mischief, Bartmus would yet again experience another heart attack, but this time it would fully kill his physical body. Luckily, thanks to the things put in place due to the last heart attack, Bartmus was attached to a life support machine that sensed this new attack and would go on to super cool his body. During this attack, Bartmus was also within the net, and because of that, that is where he continued to live, unable to come back into his physical form. Whilst in the net now living his new digital life, Bartmus would try to contact Spider Murphy for 10 months straight, sending her an email to inform her of his physical death, as well as telling her his full life memories so that they could finally finish the book the two had been working on in the years prior, which was called Raish Bartmus's Guide to the Net. Eventually, Spider Murphy would receive a predetermined "thought you might be interested" code from Bartmus, which contained all of his stories as well as the information that he was still alive, but only within the net, as she would compile the life memories book as well as her own, which she would label as Raish Bartmus's Brainware Blowout, which she would release with her fellow netrunners Dog and Edgar. Before Bartmus said his final goodbye to Spider Murphy, however, he would go on to release a program called Succubus 3 and made it look like Spider Murphy's net icon as a last Big Brother prank, making her become a lust object to what he claimed were hormonally challenged losers on the net. Bartmus didn't fully release this program until after his physical death to make sure that Spider Murphy could not get her revenge on him. As the Fourth Corporate War got into full swing, Militech launched their attack on Night City HQ to shut down their data and make a big statement. Here, Militech contacted the dead pairing of both Bartmus and Alt to get them to attack Arasaka from within the net, in which they now lived. Alt agreed quickly, trying to get revenge on the corporation who put her there in the first place. However, Bartmus did not respond immediately. Alt saw this as an opportunity to reach out to Bartmus after years of not being in contact and tried to convince him to join the cause and use his skills to hit back against this dangerous corporation. After much convincing, both Alt and Bartmus joined forces, helping Militech to track down the Soulkiller program, bringing on board Spider Murphy for assistance as well. Eventually, the three netrunners were successful in tracking down the master program of Soulkiller and told Militech all of the information they needed. But for Bartmus, this was not a good thing going forward, as his signal would be tracked down and a corporate raid would take place on his conapt building. Bartmus, knowing full well that his time was running out, contacted Spider Murphy for the last time, inviting her to a chat room where he would go on to confess his love for her, and after that released his new virus known as rabbits into the net. This virus was extremely aggressive, standing for Roving Autonomous Bartmoss Interface Drones, which would go on to breach all of the corporate data fortresses within the net and share all of their data online for all to see. With Bartmoss now being fully killed within the corporate raid, the rabbits virus was released and would go on to trigger the data crash event, which would wreak havoc all over the net, infecting 78.2% of it and triggering lots of AIs to mutate and go fully rogue. Netwatch at this point would massively panic trying to regain control of the situation, but were unable to destroy the rogue AIs. The only way they could survive this attack was to lock it all away behind a giant firewall. This forced them into making intrusion countermeasures electronic called the Black Wall, which would keep the remaining net safe from further attacks. For Bartmoss though, his life had fully come to an end, but his body remained in his life-supporting tub, still being under contract by the company that rented it to him. The world had now gone through not only a horrific war, but also a massive data crash, and going forward, it was time for a full rebuild process. But the Fourth Corporate War was still not over, and for Spider Murphy and Alt Cunningham, they were still left with a lot of work to do to take out Arasaka and further the goals of the netrunning world. With the rabid attack now over, Spider Murphy initially believed this was a good thing and that all netrunners would be able to thrive from it. However, she could not be more wrong. In fact, whilst the rabid attack did what it set out to do, it meant that the net was more strictly ruled by CityNet, essentially a powerful VPN, which meant that the netrunners' rebellion was pointless and they had in fact lost a lot of power over the corporations. But this wasn't the thing that was on Spider Murphy's mind at this point in time. Instead, she was overwhelmed by the pain of losing her close friend Raish Bartmoss and wanted to extract revenge on the corporation who had taken him from her. With this goal, Spider Murphy ended up in the Militech camp and demanded that she joins Johnny Silverhand's team, who were hired by them to destroy the new version of the Soul Killer program that was found to be developed within Night City thanks to the data Bartmoss and Alt had found in the mission before. The truth behind Silverhand's team, however, was hidden to them. The real reason they were being sent into this mission was to use them as a diversion to allow Morgan Blackhand's team to destroy the Arasaka Tower and its database alongside it. Spider's team also had another goal in this mission, and that was to try and free Alt Cunningham's digital ghost from the clutches of Arasaka's database. As the mission went ahead, it became clear that the team were about to enter combat with the Arasaka forces and they had to get ready. Spider Murphy hastily bypassed the lab doors at this point with the physical help of their cyborg teammate Shaitan, and when in the lab, would connect the console in the hope of contacting Alt. Getting into the console, Spider would dump Alt into the memory core and then release the virus into the system to make sure it destroyed all traces of the Soul Killer program. But before leaving their mission, Spider would go on to download critical information about all of the people who created the program, as well as grabbing a piece of the Soul Killer from Alt so she could use it if she ever needed it. With the mission turning into a great success, the tables would be turned as Adam Smasher and two squads of Arasaka troops would charge in their way into the area, forcing Spider to scatter Alt's personality throughout all of the net, promising her that one day she would return to try and retrieve it for good. Exiting the net and being brought right into the fight, Spider would go on to witness Silverhand come face to face with Smasher and challenge him to a fight, leading to Silverhand being killed or made unconscious in the process thanks to Smasher's sheer brutal strength. In this version of the events of the attack on Arasaka Tower in 2023, Spider would go on to kill a bunch of Arasaka troopers to get her revenge, with Shaitan attacking Smasher as well. Throughout all of this, Spider would convince herself that this was just a video game to mentally cope from what was happening around her. But as the battle got worse for them, Shaitan yelled to the rest of the team to retreat. But before they did, Rogue confirmed to Spider that Silverhand was indeed dead and there was nothing she could do. But Spider wasn't going to take this, as she would go on to pull a data slug that was downloaded to her by Alt and insert it into Silverhand's head to create an engram of him, to make sure his personality would live on for years to come. The next day after the attack on the tower, Spider alongside a restored Shaitan and Rogue headed to the Arasaka ship known as the Sea Viper to pay a visit to the son of Saburo Arasaka and rightful heir to his empire, Kay. When arriving there, Spider would go on to take out all of his guards and also emptied his hidden pistol while he was asleep. Eventually he would wake up and come face to face with her within the special tea ceremony room. When meeting together, Spider presented him with a piece of computer equipment that contained part of the Soul Killer system and convinced him to plug in as a form of taking his own life ceremony, as a punishment for ruining his company and dishonoring himself and his family. Kay would go on to oblige, and with that agreement would drink sake together until Kay was officially dead, and with that Spider would go on to destroy what she thought was the last of the Soul Killer program. After that event, the Fourth Corporate War officially came to an end, with Arasaka being humiliated and cast out from all over America. Spider after this would go outside and bid farewell to Silverhand, Blackhand and Bartmoss, and sat there watching the night sky in silence, whilst also struggling with the feeling of emptiness inside. The war was officially over, but for Spider, it didn't really feel like a great victory, as she had lost too many friends in the process. Decades passed after this event as Spider continued on in her own life. Bartmoss was officially dead, Alt was scattered throughout the net, and both Morgan Blackhand and Silverhand were nowhere to be seen, presumed dead after the destruction of the tower. However, in 2045 it was reported that Alt Cunningham got to work on a new project within the net. This was said to be a digital haven made for victims of the Soul Killer program. The rumor was that this city was to be set up on a hidden server somewhere within Night City, or within the Great White North of Canada. However, after a bioplague wiped out the population of Hong Kong, a ghost town was set up there for those who had lost their lives with that as well. Decades passed again with not much going on between these legendary Netrunners until the year of 2075, when Bartmoss's contract with his cryogenic freezer expired. This was collected up by the owners of the cryogenic freezer, who took the freezer along with Bartmoss's corpse and discarded it at the Badlands landfill at Bartmoss's request. It was only in 2077 where news spread about how Bartmoss was indeed the mastermind behind the whole data crash years ago, and where his body was located no one really knew. This was until the solo merc known as V received an odd signal directing them to a set of coordinates in the Badlands. It was in the junkyard where both V and Johnny would find Bartmoss's body, confirming his death once and for all, putting to rest a decade of urban legends and conspiracy theories. For Alt Cunningham, however, her work was not done just yet, as V and Johnny Silverhand would seek her guidance to try and help remove Johnny's engram from V's body to stop them from dying, which would ultimately leave them with a horrible choice. The one who would remain behind would go back with her beyond the Black Wall to live with her forever. Regardless, this was the last thing Alt would do that was documented, but with her living behind the Black Wall, it's most likely there will be more to her tale at a later time. The work these individuals had done over the years has not only changed the whole of Night City over the years, but also the whole state of the world, and it's safe to say the world that is lived in now would not be the way it is without their influence. They have been responsible for the defeat of Arasaka, the whole crash of the net, and the development of some of the most revolutionary digital programs the world has ever seen. It is sad that Bartmoss and Alt will never be as influential as they were once before, and who knows where Spider is after all of these years. However, in the year of 2077, Raish Bartmoss's Guide to the Net is still on sale and is still massively popular with many people, which ultimately shows you that Bartmoss, Alt and Spider will forever be known as some of the best netrunners the world has ever seen, and it makes them truly legends of Night City. Johnny Silverhand was born under the name of Robert John Linder within College Station, Texas on the 16th of November 1988. Not much is known of Johnny during his childhood years, with no information about his parents or guardians. However, when Johnny got to teenage years, he quickly signed up to serve his country, lying to the recruitment officer about his age to make sure he definitely got in. Getting into the army, it didn't take long for Johnny to see some action, as he was immediately sent to Nicaragua to take part in the Second Central American War within the year of 2003. Johnny's war was pretty horrific, and when fighting on the front lines, it was almost certain that he was going to be killed in battle. However, after losing an arm and lying there thinking his life was about to come to an end, a friend would step in and save his life. But this would come at a cost, as his friend would sacrifice his own life to save Johnny's. Mourning his friend, Johnny had to continue fighting in this corrupt and manipulative governmental war, and Johnny could really see how horrific it had become. But it didn't take long before the government's military secrets were exposed publicly, and now knowing what was going on within this war and behind the scenes, many of the American soldiers dropping their weapons and their national flags hit back against their own country the only way they knew how, by deserting the military and refusing to fight for them ever again. But the government wasn't having any of this, and back on home soil, propaganda campaigns launched to make it look like those soldiers were the ones to blame, and that the people should know who was costing their country. This worked as many of the unknowing public would go on to hate those who deserted the military and publicly shame them if they could. Johnny was amongst one of the many soldiers who went against their country's government, as he had lost an arm and a true loyal friend thanks to their lies. After leaving the war and becoming a hated member of society, Johnny would head for Night City and would go on to stay within a hotel for a whole month. And whilst there, he reflected back on his time within the war and realised he had to change going forward. Here he would change his whole name to Johnny Silverhand, as he had just got himself a replacement cybernetic arm to replace the one he lost in the conflict. With this new identity, Johnny knew he could not just sit back and watch the government get away with what they had done, and with this new goal in life, he would begin his mission of rebellion to expose all of the world's corruption, setting up a rock band that would eventually be named as Samurai. His first member to join the band was his good friend Kerry Uridine, as we explored earlier, who had been playing with small backstreet clubs for years. As the band fully set up, their first gig would be within the bar named The Red Dirt within Night City. The band continued for a few years completely independent until the year of 2003, where they would be approached by a producer known as Jack Masters and would go on to sign them up with Universal Records. With this new record label signing, the band would reach all new heights and a new era started, one of rebellion, with Johnny himself starting the rocker boy movement, allowing Samurai to become an overnight sensation, reaching the top of the US charts, breaking complete records. Due to an event that led to Nancy being arrested for murder, the band eventually broke up within 2008. But despite this breakup, Johnny would still go on to be regarded as one of the most popular musicians around, and he himself knew people saw him as such. With this in mind, Johnny felt he could use that star power to set up his solo career and continue to push his messages about overthrowing governments and corporations. But with him now on his own, away from the rest of Samurai, he would be prime target for companies trying to milk his star power for money, with one record label known as DBS Music so desperate to sign him that they would start blackmailing him by threatening to reveal his true identity as a deserter of the Second Central American conflict to the general public who loved him so much. But Johnny did not cave to this threat and instead signed once again to Universal Music, releasing his first full solo album titled Sins of Your Brothers, in which he himself would tell his listeners about his past of being labelled as a deserter, and also listing why he chose to go against the government, as well as why he is on the particular path he is on now. As the 2010s was now approaching, Johnny had completely changed the world thanks to his first ever solo album. He had now opened people's eyes to what a deserter really was, and thanks to it, the public perception of him and many others had changed to something a bit more positive, and anger was shifting back onto the government and the corporations. But this was just the start of his campaign. Johnny now knew he had people willing to follow him into his battle, and now as the decade was ending, it was time to step it up a little bit further. As Night City went into the 2010s, Johnny continued on with his rebellious campaign, and after a wave of brutal attacks by the NCPD on the homeless riots to quell them, Johnny would target his movement where the riots were going on, within the heart of Japantown. 2 years after Rogue and Johnny would split up, Johnny would get together with Alt Cunningham, and during one of their many fights, Arasaka would launch their campaign to capture her to work on the Soul Killer program, the events we have covered in the last segment of the video. But essentially, Johnny would lose what he believed was the love of his life at the time. After this tragic loss, Johnny left Night City for good, to get away from the horrific thing he had just witnessed, and to be free from the brutality of the corporations and government who were still up to the same actions that angered Johnny in the first place. Johnny travelled for a while with Santiago, as mentioned earlier, and joined up with the Aldecaldo nomad community, as he believed they were the best place for him to hide from the corporations as well as the law. This worked a treat for Johnny as well as Santiago, as during this whole time no information was recorded for what he did within the Aldecaldos or what plans he made. He was completely silent and away from the spotlight. The only notable thing that happened during this time to Johnny was in 2015, where one firefighter named Samantha Stevens would go on to save him from a fire that occurred in one of his studios. knows? You could speculate what caused this fire for weeks. Could it have been falling out with some of the nomads? Could it have been an attempt by the law to grab him? Could it have been Arasaka trying to take him out for good? Or was it simply Johnny falling asleep with a cigarette in his mouth? Who knows? But thanks to Samantha Stevens, he would go on to live another day, ready to take on whatever was next. But the year was now 2023, and this is where Johnny's story starts to get a bit confused, as you can probably guess from all the other stories earlier on. But this is most likely how it went for him. With Johnny still being on a campaign against the Arasaka Corporation, he would find himself enlisted by Militech with fellow mercs such as Morgan Blackhand. Together, these two with their strike teams would take their Militech gear and assault the Arasaka Tower in Night City. But despite the Fourth Corporate War triggering this attack, Johnny had other intentions for why he wanted to join Morgan for the assault. Johnny's reasoning was to go back in and try and find Alt once again within the Arasaka office mainframe. Johnny would go on to lead Alpha Team, who were at the front of the assault, but what happens within the tower all depends on who you believe from all of the other stories you've previously heard. The first story says that whilst on their task, Johnny and his team came under fire and were pinned down by some of Arasaka's special forces, which included the cyborg known as Adam Smasher, after they had found Alt and were trying to escape the tower's labs. Being knocked down in these attacks, Johnny was able to get back up with a Militech SMG in one hand and his precious Malorian in the other, and began shouting at and provoking Smasher, emptying everything from both guns into him. Smasher was having none of it, however, as he could not believe the nerve of this rocker boy who truly thought he could take him down. Walking up to Johnny unharmed by his bullets, Smasher would pull out his auto shotgun and with one shot would cut Johnny in half. The other story, however, told of Johnny's bravery, in which he was able to amazingly survive the initial fight against Smasher somehow. However, the Silverhand engram does not disclose this information. Instead, it would show him getting to the helicopter to escape the tower that was about to be blown up by the mini nuke planted by himself, but just before he gets on, Smasher would take him down and blow off his cybernetic arm, to then be captured by Saburo Arasaka himself and interrogated. Under their capture, he would then be subjected to their soul killer program, as his consciousness would then be scanned and stored on the engram. Whilst it is unknown what exactly took place within that tower, with both stories contradicting each other and Morgan Blackhand being unmentioned within Johnny's own memory as we explored earlier, it is a fact that Johnny did not make it out alive, and that was all thanks to Smasher and his sheer brutality. Over time, his friends and contacts would forget about him or move on from their revenge mission, and the legend of Johnny Silverhand would sadly be a tale of the past. Likewise with the band of samurai. Saying all that, there would be one place that marked his passing in Night City, and that would be in the North Oak Columbarium. Here his epitaph would use his full name and would state, Robert John Linder, son of a bitch who never gave up, a legend among legends. But that wasn't the last for Silverhand's story. Just after the Night City Holocaust that was triggered by the Arasaka Tower raid, the firefighter and Silverhand mega fan that had saved him a few years ago from his apartment fire, Samantha Stevens, was able to get access into the hot zone of the city thanks to the help of a techie named Angel. During her exploration here, Samantha would go on to discover a non-detonated mini nuke within the wrecked bunker of the destroyed towers, and when finding this, would go on to toss it into the Del Coronado Bay. But at the same time, she would also go on to discover the last remaining pieces of Johnny's body in the ruins of the tower. Realizing how significant this was, she would go on to place it within the nuke's crate to preserve it. But on top of this, she would also go on to locate some of Johnny's possessions, including one of his Malorian 3516 guns, as well as his Porsche. As an avid collector and also mega fan, Samantha knew she had to do something with these items to protect them. Here she would place the nuke case inside her garage within Night City and would go on to house and protect the items for many years. Things didn't stop there for Samantha, as within the year of 2038, she would go on to discover a group of edgerunners who were trying to get their hands on an unreleased song of Silverhand's. Seeing them as trustworthy people, she would task them with transporting the crate containing Johnny's body to Los Alamos Labs within New Mexico. But before they left, Samantha would take to the side one of the mercenaries she had come to like, a girl named Zara. Having a one-to-one with her, Samantha would hand her one of Johnny's Malorian firearms, which was wrapped in a lot of packaging, and told her to keep it. She was to be the new owner for this gun, as she or Johnny was never going to use it again, and Zara was the right person to carry it for him. Eventually, the edgerunners would go off to transport the crate, and after a long trip, they would finally reach New Mexico City and deliver the crate to the techie named Angel. Receiving the crate, Angel Angel would open it up and witness the body of Johnny Silverhand, and seeing this sight, Angel would simply remark, "Hello, my love," with rumours being that Angel was a form of Alt Cunningham back in the physical world. That or a close relation to her. Between the years of 2038 and 2077, stories about Johnny Silverhand died down once again. However, Adam Smasher, a newly transformed Borg who had been brought back by Arasaka with barely any human parts left on him anymore, was tasked with seeking out this rumoured body of Johnny Silverhand and his possessions. The rest of Johnny's story are the events of 2077, which only helped solidify his status of being a legend, as he would make amends with his past friends and make up for things he couldn't do when he was alive, as well as forge a close new bond with V, who, if the two worked well together, would view Johnny as being an honourable man and a close friend. In the end, Johnny will forever be remembered as one of the greatest legends of Night City, whether that be due to the events of the early 2000s, the 2010s and 2020s with his music and anti-corporation and government messages, or due to his actions through the body of V in 2077. However people remember Johnny, he will always be a solid part of Night City's history within the 21st century. Maybe his journey will continue on, or maybe his and V's venture into Arasaka Tower would be the last we will ever see from them. Johnny's tales might be filled with lies, and maybe many stories are yet to be fully told truthfully, but that doesn't change the fact that he made a mark on this city, and many still remember his name. And as his one and only marker within Night City says, Johnny Silverhand, aka Robert John Linder, was indeed a son of a bitch who never gave up. He truly is a legend among legends. Adam Smasher was born and raised in New York City prior to the fall of the millennium. Nothing was ultimately that special about Smasher growing up, as not much is written down. To many, he was just seen as a regular punk that roamed the city, getting into trouble at every cost, with many people describing him as just a regular worthless New York City mook. However, Smasher would eventually put his skills to use, and after his punk days of getting into trouble at every turn, he would go on to join the army, mainly due to the fact that the gang of punks he was in had been wiped out, leaving only him as the surviving member. Joining the army did not sit well with Smasher, however, as the idea of him being regimented and taking orders didn't necessarily sit right with the punk inside of him. But for a good many years, he donned the uniform and performed his duty and training. But that wasn't to last too long, as within the 2000s, after being in the forces for a few years, Smasher would be immediately discharged due to what was said to be bad conduct. And with him now leaving the army, it didn't take long before Smasher decided his next job was to use the skills he had just developed in his time in the army, and with that became a contract gunboy within New York City. This job was perfect for Smasher, as he was extremely sadistic and loved getting into fights with other individuals, with many saying he didn't have a squeamish bone in his body. But with Smasher's help, he was able to get job after job and became well known throughout all of New York, gaining him enough money that he could bolster his personal arsenal, develop more gear, purchase questionable drugs, and also have what was said to be brutal one-night stands. Things were going well for Smasher, but like his army career, that was to all change extremely fast. On one mission Smasher was sent on, everything was going to plan, until suddenly he was hit by a couple of rockets, which was said to have turned him completely into meatloaf. With Smasher essentially taken out of this world completely, but somehow still alive, his gang that he was doing the job with grabbed what was remaining of his body that had been scattered all over the battlefield and quickly escorted him back to his home city. But this clearly wasn't the end of Smasher. His reputation within the city had become too high, and he was an extremely vital asset for many people. Having him out of the game would be a complete waste of a good warrior, and because of it, one dubious corporate benefactor kept a close eye on what was happening to him and his body, and decided to get involved in the situation. Reaching out to Smasher, this corpo made a deal to get him back on his feet once again, and working in the job he ultimately loved. This corpo offered him full corporate service in a full metal body, and if he refused to take this offer up, they would just simply put him out of his misery. He had no real choice, and just simply had to accept their offer. But to many, the idea of being in a full metal body was seen as something that was losing all of your humanity. Everything that made you human would be stripped from you, and instead you were essentially just a corporate machine. But funnily enough, the idea of losing his humanity did not bother Smasher one bit, and without hesitation, he accepted the corpo's offer to become a mechanical man. Going into the 2010s and 7 years after the incident, Atom Smasher had now become the full mechanical cybernetic man that would be easily recognizable everywhere he went. Because of his new look as well as new abilities on the battlefield, Smasher became even more renowned across the eastern seaboard. With him becoming more well known, he would accept every job he got offered, which was an insane amount, with the only jobs he refused being missions that were quite clearly suicide missions to get rid of him, or a mission where he was going to be double-crossed. Smasher was quite aware of anyone trying to take him out of the game and would shut down those missions in a heartbeat. For Smasher though, he had one request to all of his clients when accepting a mission. This was unlike any other merc's requests, and if he did not get it, he would not accept the mission. This request was that collateral damage and civilian casualties are a must in everything he does, and with that, most job offers were accepted, allowing Smasher to kill anyone and destroy anything that got in his way without having to suffer the consequences. Ultimately, he would just get off of the idea of causing pain and destruction to people. But because of this way of life and utter brutality, Smasher had many enemies along the way, with one being the other Night City legend that we have previously explored, the renowned Hitman, or as they were also known solo, known as Morgan Blackhand. Both Smasher and Blackhand were not only rivals because of their similar roles, but Smasher also despised him due to his ongoing new outlook on life that metal is better than meat. And with Blackhand being majority human still, Smasher would always look at him in disgust and want to take him out of the equation. With taking Blackhand out being his new main goal, believing him to be a threat to his whole worldview, Smasher tried multiple times to challenge him in a one-to-one face-off to prove that metal was indeed better than meat. But at each opportunity, Blackhand would refuse any and all confrontation, knowing that would be exactly what Smasher wanted. But this only enraged the psychotic Smasher more, as he was now desperate to kill Morgan Blackhand, and with each snub the fire raged on more and more. But during the whole time throughout the 2010s, Smasher wasn't needed as much by the corporation that made him who he was today. But it was revealed that in fact the corporation that had brought him back from the dead and made him the cyborg that he was now was in fact a security branch linked to Arasaka themselves. But with not much going on with them not really needing him at this point in time, the branch allowed him to take on as many freelance roles he could possibly think of. That was until the turn of the 2020s when war was bucking its head between Militech and Arasaka. Smasher was delighted about this news as he just simply loved killing, and now he had an excuse to do it all of the time. He also relished the idea of this war because it finally gave him an excuse to battle his true rival, that being Morgan Blackhand, who during this war had been recruited by Militech. With the war really raging on and being a really serious focus for Arasaka, Smasher was given even more provisions to help him in his battles, with one piece of gear being the Dai Onai power armor conversion gear that when Smasher equipped it made him nearly unstoppable to all who tried to attack him. Smasher was loving warfare as mentioned, he just loved to kill people and really got his kicks from this whole event that was spreading all over the world. He was truly unstoppable in combat and he could just wipe out hundreds of Militech soldiers in a matter of seconds with a grin on his heavily messed up face. But once again, this was to all dramatically change in August 2023 when he was to be sent to the Arasaka Tower to defend from the Militech strike teams of Silverhand and Blackhand. Once again, the two events of what happened would be down to who you believe, with Silverhand's story or Blackhand's story. What was documented about Smasher within this war was that the two of him and Blackhand started to fight on the rooftop of the tower, but as they did, the nuclear bomb that Johnny had set up within the tower went off, blowing up the whole of it, killing 12,000 Arasaka employees in the process, and heavily damaging Smasher as well. Once again, the stars were aligned for Smasher as he survived the blast, but was heavily damaged, with his body being retrieved by Arasaka once again to take back to their medical center to be worked on once again. Needing him to be back in the fight, Arasaka will replace all of the damaged flesh left on Smasher with machinery, turning him completely into a machine, with the only bit of flesh visible being on his heavily scarred face. After being assembled together once again, Smasher was tasked with taking care of Silverhand's dead body, as well as all of his possessions, which he would deposit underneath an oil field without any marker or anything, making it so that no one would remember him or be able to locate his final resting place. But after that task, Smasher disappeared from the public eye for many years, with no one really knowing exactly where he had gone or what his new task was. But with Arasaka's retreat from Night City, it was most likely that he followed them wherever they set themselves up. What was known was that during these years, Smasher met Michiko Arasaka, the daughter of his boss Kei Arasaka's 17-year-old daughter, and shortly after Michiko turned 18, would date her for a few years, with her bodyguard not taking a liking to him, frequently stating to Smasher that he needs to mind his manners around her. Smasher returned to the scene in 2045 when he would go on to discover that there were many of Silverhand's possessions located within Night City and around the rest of the country. Finding these possessions, Smasher would go on to sell most of them as he deemed them being of no use to him and easy money to gain for himself. However, he would go on to keep some of them, which would include Silverhand's Porsche and his signature gun, the Malorian Arms 3516. It became quite evident that Smasher was still a vital asset to Arasaka, and after all of these years, he had been extremely loyal to their cause. Because of these facts, Smasher would be assigned as the personal bodyguard of Saburo Arasaka's son, Yorinobu, and would be tasked with some of the dirtiest work that Arasaka had ever tasked him with. Once again, Smasher would relish this opportunity and would gain an even greater reputation for his expert management of loose ends. With this new role, Smasher would set himself up at the Ebanuki docks within Watson and would turn the area into his base of operations, with Jeremiah Grayson becoming one of his most loyal men and eventually his right-hand man for being extremely loyal and hard-working. With Grayson's promotion, Smasher would also go on to give him one of his most prized possessions, that being Johnny Silverhand's unique pistol to use as his own. For a couple of decades, a lot was quiet for Adam Smasher once again, as he did undercover work for Arasaka. However, in the year of 2076, Smasher's skills were needed once again, as a new up-and-coming mercenary had stolen and was in the possession of some experimental Arasaka technology that was known as the Cyber Skeleton. This merc would be known as David Martinez, another legend of Night City, but sadly we won't be exploring him today anyway. Smasher was sent into Arasaka Tower to save the fellow Arasaka agent Douglas, who had been held hostage by David. Getting to where Douglas was, Smasher would engage with David in a series of insult exchanges before David became distracted by the fixer known as Faraday, who had awoken after David had incapacitated moments before and being taken away by Trauma Team. With David being distracted momentarily, Smasher used this opportunity to take him out and shot him in the gut, which majorly winded David and caused him to momentarily go cyber psycho, activating his time manipulation software known as the Sandavistan. Smasher retaliated by doing the same, firing a missile that would go on to hit the back of David's exoskeleton with so much force that it ejected Faraday, who was still on the Trauma Team stretcher, out of the tower completely and died in the process. With David and Lucy escaping the tower, Smasher followed suit, jumping out of the tower and crushing another member of David's crew, Rebecca, in the process, which would devastate and anger David even more, as well as many of the Cyberpunk fanbase. The battle between David's crew and Smasher would wage on, with Smasher taking out pretty much everyone in his way. David, who was in the process of turning cyber psycho completely, tried everything to take out Smasher, utilizing his Sandavistan tech, believing only he had it, but to his horror saw that Smasher also was able to use it to his advantage as well. Lucy also tried desperately to quick hack Smasher and disable his abilities, but it was no good, as it had little to no effect other than annoying him and eventually frying her cyber deck. As the battle raged on between Smasher and David, both of them used all of their cyber abilities and mechanical suits to get the upper hand on one another, but eventually it was Smasher who was the victor, as he was going to rip apart David's suit and beat him to a pulp whilst he was defenseless. With David's suit not having any of its anti-grav devices, the suit was crumpling under its own weight and tearing it apart from David's body. Time was now up for David, as Smasher would stand over him, stating that he had some fun after all, and stating that David could have been an interesting construct. But as the clock ran out for David, Smasher would execute him with a shot to the skull at point blank range. Once again, Smasher had proved that no one could stop him, despite equal machinery and a determination. Smasher still had the upper hand, and if this truly incredible up-and-coming legend of a merc and his crew of other edgerunners couldn't take out Smasher with their own technology, who who really could? Smasher knew after this that he was unstoppable. However, that was all to change in the following year of 2077, where V, who would be on a mission to cure themselves, would get the better of him, wiping him out once and for all. Smasher is a true Night City legend, but not for good reasons. His impact on the world was dramatic, as he was one of the coldest, deadliest and sadistic killers anyone had ever seen, and maybe will ever see ever again. Becoming a Borg, Smasher would lose all of his humanity, but that never seemed to matter for him, as for him, that made him better for what he needed to be. With him out of the picture, maybe Night City will be a much safer place, and maybe Arasaka will lose a bit more of their power, as they won't have him to do their dirty work anymore. But thanks to Smasher, we have also lost many of the other legends of Night City, such as Rebecca, David Martinez and Jackie Wells, who aren't officially labelled as Night City legends apart from David, but I'm calling them that anyway. Will Smasher return back to Night City to live on as a legend? Well, with how he has come back twice now, it's most likely that he will come back a third time as well. Captain Boa Boa, or how they were actually named, Andrew Weyland, was the leader of one of the most terrifying Black Ops units within the corporate world, the Water Leopards. The Leopards were a group of only Jamaican mercenaries who would do freelancer jobs for anyone they came into contact with, before linking up with a rich Australian investor known as Angus Youngblood from the corporation of Petrochem. With Youngblood as essentially their fixer, and with him joining Petrochem, the Water Leopards became a part of the company's military force, and what a force they were. Not only using their sheer brutal strength, Weyland specifically was heavily into Rastafarian mysticism and would use it as a tool to terrorize his targets and enemies. This summarized him as a person. He loves what he does and enjoys killing more than anything, making him a terrifying enemy to have. On top of that, he is also extremely loyal to Angus Youngblood, as he looks up to him as a corporate entity. Weyland loves working for Petrochem and one day hopes to be in command of his own Petrochem force. Youngblood promises to give Weyland and the Water Leopards all of that one day when he becomes the top dog at the corporation, but that might prove more difficult than it sounds, as the Petrochem soldiers do not take kindly to Weyland and his Jamaican mercs. Despite waiting for their goals to come true, Captain Boa Boa has made a massive name for himself within Night City, having survived personal confrontations with Morgan Blackhand, Jenny Flex, a solo that's considered to be the 5th best within America, as well as John Jones, yet again another terrifying solo who was exceptional in hand-to-hand combat, apparently anyway. Unfortunately, Andrew Weyland and the Water Leopards would eventually lose power, as 12 of their members within 2020 would go on to be killed off due to what was corporate infighting and poor intelligence, forcing the Leopards out of Petrochem and back to freelancing once again. Weyland would go on to have a son to pass his legacy down onto, however, a boy named Crispin, who, like his father, would want to make a name for himself and become a legend. And in 2077, Andrew Weyland would go on to die, many remembering how fierce he was in combat and what he did for the corporation of Petrochem. His vault would now lay within the columbarium, where his epitaph would read simply, "He tried to shape reality at a lethal cost." However, if his son Crispin were to team up with V and take on Arasaka in their tower, he himself could live as a legend of Night City and fulfill what his father wanted before him. Another music legend to the list, here we have the pop sensation Lizzy Wizzy. Lizzy was born under the name of Elizabeth Wisenfirth, and by the year of 2070 became a renowned artist and a huge celebrity all over the world. Whilst her career was going well, it wasn't until 2071 where Lizzy was born again, and her career catapulted even further as she would undergo a full transformation into a fully cybernetic individual. To do this though, Lizzy wanted to do it in a way that was, in her words, an erotic reimagining of Snow White. As her live performance came to an end, Lizzy would go backstage and eat a synthetic apple that would be laced with specifically prepared poison that caused her to have a cardiac arrest. The audience was shown all of this on the massive LED screen, as they were all witness to a close-up of their beloved pop star's electrocardiogram and the flatline whilst her body was lying there motionless on the floor. 5.5 hours this continued for, as the concert was on hold, with teams of Ripper Doc docs rushing in to swap out her biological organs for the latest generation of more technology's implants. Eventually, with all of these implants being installed, Lizzy was revived, and when she got up, Lizzy immediately started singing her new song, Restart, Reheart, Repeat, something that she had been planning all along, and because of it, that specific single topped the charts throughout the whole of 2072. This was the largest in her anarcho terrorist performances that she had ever done. Before that, Lizzy was just known for her iconic transformations whilst on stage, giving out her clothes to friends and people who needed them, and many other things. But now that she had transformed into her new self, Lizzy just wanted to give out implants to people. But unfortunately, this wasn't as simple, as her complex top-tier cyberware were only linked to the user, so anyone she gave them to couldn't use them for themselves. With a new fully chromed up Lizzy, she would go around being known for her views against homogenization, and even mounted an armed assault on the Bidine Systems factory, where she and a group of mercenaries took full control of the building and stole approximately 1,200 different implants. As mentioned a minute ago, Lizzy would have plans for these, as she would want to give them all out to her fans at an improvised concert, which would go on to be broadcast live, knowing full well that no corporate soldiers or NCPD officers would dare take her out or even harm her when she was live to the whole city and world. Despite getting away with it, many in the media speculated it was all planned by Biodyne and Lizzy together to get their name out, and all of the implants and the renovation of the factory would be paid by Lizzy herself. Essentially, they believed it was all a publicity stunt paid by the tech companies, similar to what people believed about Lizzy's transformation stunt as well, in which she was paid to do it by Mori Technologies. Lizzy, however, denies these claims even to this date. However, it's hard not to see a connection between her and the tech companies. By 2077, Lizzy had a new fascination, and that was the technology of brain dances. Lizzy wondered about the boundary between our documentation of reality versus our active shaping of it, and with this mindset, many believed that Lizzy was going to be releasing her own BD of her performances, something that she technically does, albeit it is a bootleg version of one, after performing at the Black Sapphire out within Dogtown, being personally invited to perform by Kurt Hansen, as she went on to put one of the most visually stunning performances many had ever seen. Honestly, it's phenomenal what the team at CD Projekt Red did with this live performance, and whilst it is optional to watch, you have to just experience it at least once. However, trouble did hit Lizzy during this year, as her boyfriend of the time, Liam Northam, plotted behind her back to make an engram copy of her personality and would regularly meet up with people from Arasaka at the Riot Club within Watson. Lizzy would be suspicious of him, wondering why he kept going there, believing it was because he was having an affair, and wanted to dig into what was actually going on. Here she would hire the Merc of V to investigate what was going on, with them either discovering the dark, terrifying secret that he was trying to copy her whole personality, or just going for the easy option, stating it was just an affair and moving on. To this day though, Lizzy still blows the world away with her stunning performances, and still continues to tour all over the world and in low orbit, with her up and coming tour being located on the stunning space station known as the Crystal Palace. She is always being talked about and is an icon for cyberware, and whilst yes, she is more known as a music legend, she does live most of her time within Night City, and because of that, like with Kerry Eurodyne, that makes her a true Night City legend. Surprisingly on this list, we have our local hideaway fixer and boxing enthusiast Viktor Vektor. Unfortunately, like a few on this list, his upbringing is pretty unknown. He was born on the 5th of April, but unknown what year. At a guess, I'd imagine that Viktor was born around the 2020s, making him around 50, but considering Kerry is 87, Viktor could be, for all we know, 90 years of age. Regardless, Viktor was once a heavyweight boxer within Watson and a member of the Night City Devils, competing in the Watson Boxing Grand Prix. Viktor was renowned for his boxing skills, really setting the world alight, especially with the fact that he has no cyberware on him. He is what is known as fully Ganic, meaning he has beaten up chromed up animal gang members in the ring with just his fists. However, after coming second within the Grand Prix, Viktor would go on to give up that life and settle down for a regular back alley ripper doc job. He didn't lose his love for boxing, however, as he is seen a lot of the time just watching it whilst waiting for clients knights to visit him. Although it might seem like Viktor isn't anyone special, he quite clearly is a man not to be messed with, as he has threatened to kill whole gangs of scavs if they even show their face near him or within his own clinic. The fact that once again he is a boxing legend in Night City without any visible cyberware says that he really does pack a punch, and it's best to always pay him for a job he has done. In the end, he might not be the most obvious Night City legend, but he certainly has made a mark on the boxing scene and even the Ripper Doc scene as well. Whilst he might not be a legend to some members of Night City, at least to V and Jackie, he is anyway. We end our list with our main character and local merc of V, who technically can be a Night City legend if our player wants them to be. Lore-wise, they can only really be a Night City legend if you pick the right ending, the main one being the Path of Glory ending, where V charges into the Arasaka Tower in Night City with the help of Rogue, Weyland and Johnny Silverhand, losing Rogue in the process and returning back to Night City to take over ownership of the afterlife, before going on to one final raid at the Crystal Palace. This is technically the only way for V to become a Night City legend, as the other endings, such as the Devil one, do not allow for V to get that overall respect from their peers, and the Tower ending from Phantom Liberty just turns them back into an everyday person that blends into the world around them, making them essentially nobody in a world where they can restart their life all over again. That said, I would argue that V is just automatically a Night City legend, as they help out with so many people all over the city. They do so many jobs for the NCPD if they want, earn tons of street credit, and by that point in their life where they have to get the cure, they are strong enough to completely destroy one of the most powerful individuals Night City has ever seen, Adam Smasher, someone that has killed 2 and maybe even 3 of our other Night City legends of Johnny Silverhand, David Martinez, and maybe even Blackhand if he is actually dead. Even if people didn't respect V after siding with Arasaka or whatever, the story of how Adam Smasher fell would have been told, so V would automatically be a Night City legend by default. So for me, regardless of what ending is canon for making them a Night City legend, they will always be one, as their story will be told for years on end, regardless of their final decision. But with that said, those are all of the Night City legends from the Cyberpunk universe, apart from the edgerunners, who I will be exploring at a later date. If you have made it to this part of the video, thank you so much for checking it out, and make sure you leave a comment with your favorite legend or something nice about the video, as well as a like and subscribe if you haven't up until this point. I also want to say a huge thanks to my supporters for allowing me to make long videos like this, such as my small fishes, my big fishes, Greg and Noxvox, my YouTube channel Wise Ones, Sith Lord 906, Video Gamer 75, and our new guy RIP City, my sharks Alfred Correa, Jason X117 and Nia Park, and my Megalodons Sinus, Bad Clams 83 and Hazy Thoughts. If you also want to support this channel, the links are down below, as well as all of my other playlists of other games as well as Cyberpunk. And with all that said, I'm going to give my voice a rest, and I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.